And I
Imagine
hope
an
that
idea that was so powerful it seeped into every corner of society. An idea that still controls the lives of millions across the world, including Australia and New Zealand. It's probably an idea that you've heard next to nothing about. The clean break is one of those ideas that will go down in history as a truly epic fail. But we can learn a lot from one of the world's worst ideas. Up until the 1940s, Australian families naturally absorbed babies born outside marriage. In my own family, I have three matriarchs who all mothered their firstborns as single parents. Their family wrapped a protective blanket around them all, and life continued as it should altogether. My matriarchs all went on to marry good men, enjoyed a rich family life, and created another human chapter to the lineage that I would one day inherit. But things were about to change forever. After the World Wars, high rates of infertility created a powerful market demand for the fresh newborns of other people. Known as the forced adoption era, this period saw the illegal removal of more than 250,000 Australian newborns from their mothers. This happened right up until the late 1980s. The clean break was one of those many ideas that shaped the forced adoption era, but it was the idea which removed newborn babies from their mothers. So what is the clean break? In the moments after birth, the newborn baby is taken from their mother's body and quickly relocated to the hospital's nursery. Most often, mothers were not permitted to see or hold their baby. A pillow was placed over the mother's face or a sheet screen across their body. Some were shackled to their birthing bed. Many were heavily sedated and have little memory of their time in hospital or signing consent forms for their baby to be adopted. The clean break was considered a kindness, a bit like the idea that ripping off a Band-Aid hurts less than the slow peel. It was smoother, quicker, and easier for everyone involved. The belief was that if a mother never saw her baby, she would never miss them. And the baby would not miss their mother, an absurd idea even for back then. What the clean break did was to give power to other absurd ideas, and many of these still survive today. You may have heard the absurd idea that mothers love their babies so much they freely gave them away en masse, without regret and for a better life with married strangers. Or babies are a blank slate. They can be taken from their mother and given to another without any consequences. They won't even miss their mother because babies have no memory. My clean break happened the day I was born in July 1972. I was one of hundreds taken from their mothers that year at King Edward Memorial Hospital. My mum was allowed to hold me for just a few minutes. She noticed I had my dad's blue eyes and she named me Leanne Joy. My mother kissed me on my pink forehead and said goodbye. I was taken, forever disappeared from my mother's sight. I was deposited into a Perspex tub alongside dozens of other fresh newborns in a nursery set aside for just my kind. In 2020, I applied for my birth records. I discovered that after I was born, I refused to feed from the bottle. I had lost weight, and I ended up in the hospital's special care nursery for about a week. This new information gave me an insight into a reoccurring dream I have had my entire life. Unlike most people who experience a joyful free-falling into the dream world, I plummet through a long red-hued darkness and into my little newborn baby body. I am alone. I whimper gently for my mother to come and rescue me from this dark place. I wait for her to appear. I listen for the sound of my mother's voice, but there is nothing but a deathly silence. I am very tired and so hungry. I will be safe when she comes, and I can finally sleep knowing she will protect me. Where is my mother? Desperation fills my body. I scream in fear. She still does not come. No one comes. I am still and silent, and I wait for death to end my suffering. So clearly, my newborn self remembers a lot from my clean break. We do know that babies for adoption were left in nurseries for weeks and months, cared for by a rotating roster of nurses who tried their best. But for us babies, there were no joyful visits and long cuddles from our fathers, our grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. Irrespective of one's adoptive experience, all adoptive people have been exposed to the catastrophic neonatal grief and the pre-verbal trauma of losing our mother. Some have experienced physical injuries from our high-risk birth, which still impacts us today. Others were deemed imperfect and languished unnecessarily inside Perth's hospitals and baby homes. We missed vital foundational attachment milestones with a singular caregiver, and this has impacted generations of adopted people and their loved ones. It is simply no wonder that international research confirms that adoption survivors are 4 times more likely to experience depression, anxiety, personality, inflammation and pain disorders, complex PTSD, and to take their own lives. The clean break of adoption was forced on us. Had we been given a choice and a voice, none of us would have consciously chosen an unknown human over our mother, father, and family. My clean breaking continued as I was taken across the Swan River to Nagala, Perth's busiest adoptive institution. Little Leanne Joy disappeared behind Nagala's 6-foot-high barbed wire fence, where the final preparations were made for her adoption. The baby with the blue eyes and the little button nose that constantly cried would be erased from the public records and replaced with a new fictional character named Jennifer. Nagala's matron, Beryl Grant, was the government's hand. She was the one who sourced me for adoption and helped to create my fake identity. I even have her signature on one of my documents. You will also be surprised to learn that all adopted people have 2 birth certificates. My first is like yours, of my authentic self. I am Leanne Joy. The second is a legal fiction that claims I was as if born to my adoptive parents. Now, in Australia, it's a crime to create a fraudulent birth certificate. In some states, the punishment is 2 years in jail or a $10,000 fine, unless it is for the purpose of adoption. Adopted people are also subjected to a lifelong contract of ownership, the adoption order. Unlike the many contracts we commit to during our lifetimes, where an end date is always in sight, I am bound to obey my adoption contract for life. Despite the fact I never gave consent for and never signed up to such an absurd idea. For me to dissolve this contract and reclaim my identity, I must jump through way too many burning rings of fire. Just like a child, I must have my biological mother's permission, spend thousands on legal proceedings, and ask the approval of a state high court judge. But what happens if my mother is estranged from me, or she says no, or she's passed away? Why make the privilege of belonging to your biological family so complex, so difficult, and re-traumatizing for adopted people? So you can see how adopted people are denied their basic right to a truthful identity. This is my identity, not my mother's or anyone else's. So why do I need another's permission? For example, we don't ask transgendered adults to get their mum's permission before they transition. That would be an absurd idea, wouldn't it? I ask you a question here to think on. If my identity has no value, then why is yours so important that it is protected by law, but I am denied mine? We still have fully grown adults amongst us who have no idea they are adopted. Known as late discovery adoptees, anyone here in this room today may be adopted and not know. Until you do your DNA, none of us can be 100% sure they are not adopted. Imagine how you might feel at discovering that you have another family, identity, and a name. And as your world implodes with the shocking news, be rest assured there is no specialised crisis services, counselling, or the fast tracking of your search application. You'll just have to cross your fingers and hope that you've not missed meeting your real parents. Another absurd idea that still lives today is the veto system, where adoptees or mothers are not to contact each other. It's a type of lifelong restraining order designed just for survivors of forced adoption, simply for the apparent crime of giving birth or being born. Currently in WA, there are 800 of these, which prevent freedom of movement and the right to important identity and health information. More than 10 years ago, we had a flurry of apologies and a federal inquiry into forced adoption in 2012. The WA state government has dragged its feet and implemented just 2 of the recommendations. So there is a roadmap, but we are still waiting for those in power to make the changes that clean break survivors so desperately need. The practice of baby thievery is deeply embedded in Australian society, thanks to a long history of stealing humans under the guise of a better life, or worse still, as punishment. Many of our convicts were just kids, the stolen generations of our First Nations families, the forgotten Australians, and the children abducted off the streets of Britain and brought to Australia. Hundreds of thousands of infants, toddlers, children, and teens, all wrongfully removed from their parents, family, and cultures. The humanitarian toll is devastating and reaches into our generations that follow. Adoption is another of these failed social experiments, a relic of the past that has no valuable function. For those who may not have that protective blanket of extended family to fall back on, guardianship can be a temporary option. The child will not lose their family, identity, or name, and when the time is right, mother and child will be reunited again. Imagine how different the outcome would be for everyone if everything was transparent. The desire to be a parent must never come at the lifelong personal cost of one's right to a truthful identity. Thanks to the rich and famous who outsource everything, including pregnancy, we see the same absurdities from the forced adoption era being resold to another unsuspecting generation. The clean break idea and identity theft continues inside the practices of open adoption, international adoption, anonymous donor conception, and our increasing tolerance for surrogacy. It is time to start listening to the people who have lived these lives and are speaking out more freely. When you hear an adopted person speak their truth, hold space for them and listen deeply, no matter how uncomfortable it makes you feel. Hold your tongue and think on this. If adoption is so wonderful, then which of your children will you be giving away today to a stranger and to never see them again? We are the experts of our lived experience, not government, CEOs, famous adoptive parents, other family, friends, or someone who knows of someone who is adopted. Let's stop gaslighting and whitewashing, ignoring, silencing, pathologizing, stealing, and talking over the voices of adopted people. Please don't tell an adopted person they are lucky to have 2 families, for many of us feel that we do not belong to either. Despite the magical reunions you consume on TV, our relationships often falter after the honeymoon phase because we can never replace those missing decades. Please refrain from offering unqualified counselling tips such as, "That's just what they did back then," and "It happened so long ago, you should be over it by now." Never use adopted people as a platform for your personal viewpoint on abortion. Creating another generation of displaced people is not the solution. Providing quality reproductive health and education is what we need. If an adopted person doesn't want to celebrate their birthday, don't make them. Remember that the day we were born was literally the worst day of our lives and may not be something we want to celebrate. Don't tell an adopted person they should be grateful that they were saved. I had a perfectly good mother and I did not need another. Nagala's matron Grant dispatched me to strangers with the power of her pen. I was not a gift from one mother to another, and I was not chosen. I was abducted and trafficked, and I was stolen. If we want a healthier and happier society, Let's learn from our uncomfortable past. The business of family separation is as toxic to humanity as lead, asbestos, and smoking. We've banned these harmful products, so why not adoption?